Hello, welcome to Learn English Lab.
Hi there.
Today's podcast topic, is creativity a talent or a skill? It's one of those really fundamental questions. People have wrestled with it for, centuries.
Absolutely.
And how we think about it, it really shapes so much, doesn't it? Like how we teach, how companies try to innovate, even how we see our own potential.
It really does.
Are some people just, born creative? Or is it more like something you can develop, like learning an instrument or maybe a new language?
It's a fascinating question, and yeah, it has really deep historical roots. What's interesting, I think, is how our very idea of what creativity is has shifted over time and across different cultures.
Right.
That change alone sort of tells you it's not some simple fixed thing. The research we've looked at, it suggests the answer isn't really as straightforward either. It seems to point towards something more dynamic, an interplay.
Okay, so maybe before we jump into the whole talent versus skill thing, we should try and pin down what we actually mean by creativity based on, the consensus.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like it's a bit more specific than just having a wild imagination.
Yeah, that's a good starting point. The frameworks we're seeing don't just treat creativity as like randomness or just thinking up weird stuff. There's a pretty consistent definition that pops up, focusing on two key things that usually need to be there.
Okay, what are they?
Well, first, for something to count as creative, it generally needs to be novel. It has to be original, unique, or at least significantly different from what's already out there. It needs to break some new ground.
So newness
Yeah.
or genuinely different, yeah.
That's it. Or maybe combining existing things in a totally new way. But novelty on its own, that's not quite enough. The second crucial bit is value.
Value.
Yeah, the idea or the product or whatever it is, it needs to have some kind of worth. That could mean it's useful, solves a problem, or maybe it's just aesthetically pleasing or holds some cultural significance in its context.
Ah, okay. So it's got to be new and it has to actually matter somehow. Like that example of a new smartphone app. It might have a really novel design, something we've never seen, but for it to be creative in this sense, it also has to do something useful, right? Solve a problem, enhance user experience.
Spot on. It can't just be weird for the sake of being weird. That dual requirement, novelty and value, is really key. It helps us separate genuine innovation from just, oddity. People like Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who studied creative folks a lot, really emphasize this. It gives us a solid base.
But thinking about novelty and value,
Yeah.
that immediately brings up a bit of a challenge, doesn't it? Judging what's actually novel or valuable can be pretty subjective.
Oh, absolutely. And that subjectivity is a really important part of the picture. What gets labeled creative often really depends on who's looking, the cultural background, even the time period. Think about Vincent van Gogh's paintings.
Yeah.
During his lifetime, his work was seen as radical, way outside the norms. It wasn't widely appreciated, didn't really have market value.
So not seen as having value by the people around him then?
Not really, no. But today, his paintings are considered absolute masterpieces, hugely valuable both artistically and culturally. So that massive shift in perception makes you wonder, right, was the creativity always there, inherent in the painting, just waiting for people to catch up? Or did the world's ability to see that value change over time, influenced by, new art movements, changing tastes, learned techniques? The fact that perception can shift so dramatically suggests creativity isn't just some fixed quality inside the creator or the object. Its recognition is also learned and tied to culture.
The materials also mention different scales of creativity. It's not just about these huge world-changing things we often think of first.
That's right. There's what they call big C creativity. This is the kind that leads to major paradigm shifts. Figures like Albert Einstein completely changing physics, or maybe Frida Kahlo, whose approach to self-portraiture really broke ground and influenced art history. These are the achievements that have a massive impact on a whole field, or even globally.
That's the kind of thing people often label as genius.
Pretty much, yeah. But then there's also little c creativity. And this is the kind we all use probably every day. It's figuring out a clever way to organize your kitchen cupboards, or making up a new game with your kids, or finding a neat little workaround for a problem at work. Psychologists like Mark Ronco have really drawn attention to this distinction.
And seeing it as a spectrum, from that rare big C down to the everyday little c, it kind of makes it clear that creativity isn't just for a tiny elite group, right?
No.
It seems more like a basic human thing, something everyone has to some extent, even if it shows up really differently.
Absolutely.
And that spectrum, that variation, really fuels this whole talent versus skill debate we're digging into.
It definitely does, and we can explore creativity further by looking at different types, like categorizing it by domain. Is it artistic, scientific, maybe entrepreneurial, or just everyday problem solving? Or we can look at the process itself. Understanding the creative process is quite revealing. Graham Wallace, an early thinker on this, proposed 4 stages.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing those. Preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification.
That's them. So preparation is all about immersing yourself in the problem, gathering info, getting the background knowledge, basically, doing the groundwork. Incubation is stepping back, letting the ideas sort of bubble away in your subconscious.
Let it simmer.
Yeah. Then illumination is the aha moment, that flash of insight. And finally, verification is taking that raw idea and developing it, testing it, refining it, making sure it actually works and has value.
Okay, so preparation sounds very skill-based. Learning, research, and verification too, testing, executing. But incubation and illumination, they feel a bit more mysterious, maybe more linked to innate processes.
That's a really good point, and it starts to hint at this blend we're talking about. The fact that we can even map out a process like this suggests that parts of creativity are systematic. They could potentially be trained. You can learn how to prepare better, how to maybe create conditions that help incubation, and definitely how to verify and refine ideas more effectively.
And the context seems important too. Like the creativity of a writer working alone feels different from a big team designing a new piece of tech.
Hugely different. Collaborative creativity, like in that tech team or a research lab, leans heavily on things like communication skills, being able to work well in a team, building on what other people suggest. That setting might really emphasize learned skills in collaboration and group problem solving, perhaps more than solitary work, which might seem to rely more on that individual spark. So these different contexts, they just add another layer of complexity to a simple talent or skill answer.
Let's loop back to that subjectivity idea. How do things like culture and history actively shape how we even see creativity?
Oh, they have a massive impact. What one culture values as creative might be seen very differently somewhere else. Think about the contrast often drawn between, say, Western cultures and some Eastern cultures. In many Western societies, there's historically been a strong emphasis on individual originality. Breaking the mold, expressing a unique personal vision. That aligns quite well with the idea of creativity as an innate individual talent.
The whole lone genius idea.
Exactly that archetype. But contrast that with many Eastern traditions, say in parts of East Asia. There you might find higher value placed on mastering traditional forms with incredible skill and subtlety, or on incremental improvements made collectively. Think of Chinese calligraphy. Creativity isn't about inventing new characters, but about expressing deep skill and sensitivity within very established ancient forms. Or the Japanese concept of kaizen, which is all about continuous, often collaborative improvement.
That's definitely creativity, but it feels much more grounded in skill, discipline, and tradition than some sudden innate flash.
It really does. And these cultural differences in what gets celebrated show that creativity isn't just some fixed quality inside a person. It's shaped by the values, the history, the practices of a society. It makes it look much more like a skill or a set of skills that are learned and guided by the cultural context. And historically, the view has shifted too. Like we said, the Middle Ages often saw it as divine inspiration, a gift from above. The Renaissance celebrated human achievement, genius combined with mastery of craft. The Industrial Revolution emphasized practical invention, skill applied to solve problems. And now psychology sees it more as a cognitive process we can study and maybe even cultivate.
So if we put all that together, the fuzzy definitions, the different scales, the subjectivity, the cultural shifts, what does it really tell us about that core question? Talent or skill?
Well, it strongly suggests creativity isn't some fixed, unchanging thing you're just born with or without. It's complexity, its dependence on context, the way its value is judged externally. It all points to something dynamic, something influenced by learning, practice, environment, culture. And that flexibility, that really leans towards the idea that it's, at least in large part, a skill.
Okay, then let's really dive into that argument. The case for creativity being primarily a talent, something you're mostly born with. This view zooms in on those natural abilities, those predispositions that seem to give some people an amazing head start.
Right, and the classic examples here are often the prodigies. You think of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart composing sophisticated music when he was just 5 years old, or Pablo Picasso showing incredible artistic skill, drawing with real sophistication as a very young child. Cases like these, they almost seem to defy explanation through just early training. It really looks like they had some kind of inborn gift, a natural ability way beyond their years or experience.
And has psychological research backed this up, this link to innate abilities?
Well, yes, it's been explored. Early research, like Lewis Terman's big longitudinal studies of gifted kids, found that many individuals with very high IQs also tended to be creative, though Terman himself was careful to say high intelligence didn't automatically equal high creativity. More recently, theories like Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences suggest creative talent might be stronger in certain areas, like an innate feel for musical rhythm, or exceptional spatial reasoning, or a natural way with words. Someone with that kind of built-in aptitude in one area might find it easier, more natural to be creative there, which suggests a talent rooted in their biology.
And this is where the neuroscience gets really interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Brain studies seem to show actual physical differences in creative people.
Did you? Yeah. Things like fMRI scans have given us a peek into what's happening in the brain during creative tasks. Research by neuroscientists like Nancy Andreessen looked at highly creative individuals and found they tended to show heightened activity in what's called the default mode network.
That's the part linked to mind-wandering, daydreaming, right? Letting thoughts drift.
That's the one. It's thought to be involved in internal thinking, imagination, and making those spontaneous connections between ideas that seem unrelated. It looks like it plays a key role in generating Orville ideas. And then other work by researchers like Rex Young suggests that highly creative people might also have better connections between this default mode network and the executive control network, the part involved in focus, planning, evaluating ideas.
So it's not just about having lots of wild ideas, it's also about having the brain wiring to sort of harness them, evaluate them.
That seems to be the idea. It's about the interplay, the communication between these networks. And the thinking is that these differences in brain structure or connectivity could have a genetic basis. That points towards an innate biological underpinning for certain creative tendencies.
Is there other evidence for a genetic link, like from twin studies?
Yeah, behavioral genetics, especially twin studies, offers some support here. Robert Plumman's work, for instance, has estimated the heritability of certain creative traits, things like divergent thinking ability or artistic talent, somewhere in the range of 20% to maybe 50%.
Okay, so genetics plays a part, but not the whole story.
Exactly. It suggests genetics accounts for a noticeable chunk of the differences we see in creative ability, but it also leaves a big chunk, maybe half or more, potentially, down to environmental factors. The materials also point to those famous creative families like the Bachs churning out composers for generations, or the Bronte sisters all being literary powerhouses. Now, environment and culture were obviously huge for them, but those family clusters do make you wonder about a possible genetic predisposition running in the family line.
What about those eureka moments?
Yeah.
Those sudden flashes of insight that feel like they just pop into your head from nowhere.
Yeah, those moments definitely fuel the talent argument. They highlight the intuitive, maybe unconscious side of creativity. You know the famous story about the chemist Auguste Kekulé supposedly figuring out the ring structure of benzene after dreaming about a snake eating its tail?
Right.
Or the mathematician Henri Poincaré having a Meiji insight about a complex problem just as he was stepping onto a bus. These experiences feel like a sudden leap, not like a logical step-by-step thinking. It suggests that maybe some people's brains are just naturally wired to make these kinds of intuitive, non-linear connections, perhaps below the level of conscious awareness.
And some historical figures just seem to embody this idea of a rare, almost inexplicable gift.
Yes, people whose achievements are hard to explain just by looking at their training or background. The Indian mathematician Srinivasa Ramanujan is a fascinating example. He came up with incredibly profound and original mathematical theorems with very little formal training in Western math, seeming to rely on this extraordinary innate mathematical intuition. Or you look at an artist like Jean-Michel Basquiat, developing his incredibly powerful and unique style with relatively little formal art schooling. Cases like these really bolster the idea that some individuals might possess rare, inherent gifts that let them achieve amazing things without necessarily following the usual path of skill development.
And personality traits also seem to tie strongly into this talent argument.
They do. Research by people like Gregory Feist has consistently found links between certain personality traits and creative achievement across different fields. One of the strongest, most consistent findings is a connection with high scores on openness to experience.
Which is about being curious, imaginative, liking new things, that sort of stuff.
Exactly. It covers things like intellectual curiosity, enjoying variety, having a rich fantasy life, being sensitive to art and beauty, and being willing to entertain unconventional ideas and experiences. It feels pretty fundamental to a creative outlook. And because studies show openness has a significant genetic component, it fits well with the talent idea. It suggests some people are just naturally more predisposed to seek novelty, take intellectual risks, engage with ambiguity, all crucial for creative exploration. Other traits, like being intrinsically motivated, driven by the joy of the activity itself, not external rewards, and having a tolerance for uncertainty, also crop up consistently and might have innate roots.
Okay, all right. Let's pivot now. Let's unpack the other side. The argument for creativity is a skill, something that can be learned, practiced, honed over time. This view really emphasizes effort, discipline, and using specific techniques.
And this perspective gets a lot of backing from research on how people develop expertise in general. K. Anders Ericsson's work on deliberate practice is really central here. His idea is that reaching really high levels of performance in any complex area, music, chess, science, whatever, takes an enormous amount of focused, structured effort over a long, long time. It's not just repeating something mindlessly, it's practicing with a clear goal, constantly getting feedback, and pushing yourself just slightly beyond what you can currently do comfortably.
So if we look back at Mozart again, yes, incredible innate talent, no doubt. But his father, Leopold, was a very demanding teacher, wasn't he? And Mozart himself put in countless hours of practice from a ridiculously young age.
Absolutely. That phenomenal talent was clearly nurtured, amplified by intense discipline training. His genius wasn't just some effortless magic. It was built on a massive foundation of learned skill. This viewpoint argues that even if you have that initial spark, that natural ability, it needs sustained effort and skill development to really catch fire and reach its full potential.
And the materials talk about how creative skills can actually be taught and cultivated, right? There are methods.
Oh, definitely. There are lots of examples. Techniques like brainstorming, just generating tons of ideas quickly without judging them at first, are specifically designed to get you thinking divergently, breaking out of usual patterns. Mind mapping helps you visually organize thoughts and see connections. Edward de Bono's work on lateral thinking offers systematic ways to tackle problems from completely different angles, deliberately sidestepping logical ruts.
You can actually sign up for workshops on this stuff.
You certainly can. And many industries actively use structured methods for innovation. Design thinking is a really big one now, used everywhere from tech companies to schools. It lays out a process. Empathize, define, ideate, prototype, test, providing a systematic, learned framework for tackling problems creatively. The fact that these methods exist, are teachable, and actually work in practice provides strong support for the idea that creativity isn't just some mysterious gift. It involves skills you can learn and get better at.
How does the environment we're in and the culture around us fit into this skill argument?
Environment is huge for the skill perspective. Think about kids growing up in really stimulating homes. Lots of books, art supplies, music, imaginative play, exposure to different ideas. They often show higher levels of creative thinking and output. These environments provide the resources, the encouragement for exploration. There was a study by Kyung-hee Kim around 2010 that found kids who went through specific curricula designed to teach creative thinking skills actually showed significant improvements on divergent thinking tests. That's pretty clear evidence that education can actively nurture creative capacity.
So it's not just that creative kids happen to be in those environments. The environment itself seems to help develop the skills.
That looks like the case, yeah. And culture, like we touched on before, really shapes how creativity gets expressed and what's valued. Robert Sternberg's cross-cultural work highlighted this. We talked about Western cultures often prizing individual originality, while some Eastern cultures might place more value on mastering traditions or collective innovation.
Like the discipline in Japanese craftsmanship, or maybe the collaborative creativity in traditional African music or storytelling.
Exactly. Those cultural differences show that creativity doesn't look the same everywhere because it's not just a fixed trait. It's molded by the norms, the expectations, the learned practices of a society. That makes it behave much more like a skill or a set of skills shaped by context.
The importance of just putting in the time, sustained practice comes up a lot too, even outside formal training.
For sure. You know, people talk about Malcolm Gladwell popularizing the 10,000-hour rule, which comes from Ericsson's research. While the exact number of hours is debated, the core idea holds. Achieving real expertise and mastery in any field, including creative ones, usually involves a massive amount of dedicated, focused work over time.
You think of bands like the Beatles playing those marathon sets in Hamburg clubs, really honing their skills before they hit it big. Or writers like Stephen King, who's famous for his disciplined daily writing routine, whether he feels inspired or not.
Those are perfect examples. They illustrate that what can look like effortless genius from the outside is often built on thousands upon thousands of hours of persistence, learning, failing, and refining their craft. Creative output very often comes from that kind of disciplined effort and learned habit, not just waiting for lightning to strike.
And there are specific tools and strategies mentioned that people use to actively boost creative problem solving.
Yes, things like SCAMPER, that's an acronym for substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to another use, eliminate, reverse, or TIZ, which is a more systematic method often used in engineering, based on analyzing patterns in past inventions. These aren't just abstract ideas, they're structured techniques. They give you frameworks for generating new ideas by systematically looking at existing things and asking, what if we change this? Or how could this be different?
And companies actually use these, right, in areas like product development or advertising.
They do. Businesses train their teams in these methods because they find them effective for sparking innovation. The very fact that these tools exist, can be taught, learned, and applied successfully in professional settings is strong evidence that creativity involves skills that can be developed and used systematically.
And finally, the role of education itself seems key in fostering creativity.
Education is critical. Educational approaches that move beyond just memorizing facts, think Montessori, Waldorf schools, project-based learning, inquiry-based learning, they are intentionally designed to foster creativity. They emphasize exploration, curiosity, thinking across different subjects, and giving students chances to tackle messy, open-ended problems where there isn't just one right answer.
Really encouraging that divergent thinking we talked about.
That's it. And studies, like one from the OECD back in 2015, have shown that students who learn in these more inquiry-based environments tend to score significantly higher on creative problem-solving tests compared to students in more traditional lecture-heavy settings. Those findings are pretty powerful. They strongly suggest creativity can be actively taught and significantly boosted through the right kind of educational practices. It really supports the view that creativity is, to a large extent, a skill.
Okay, so we've heard strong arguments for both sides. There's compelling evidence for innate talent, the predispositions, the prodigies, the brain differences, and equally compelling evidence for creativity as a learned skill developed through practice, environment-specific techniques. So where do the materials kind of land? It feels like it can't be just one or the other.
That is definitely the overwhelming conclusion you get from looking at all this research and these different perspectives. Creativity really seems best understood not as something you either have genetically or you acquire purely through practice, but as this complex dynamic interplay between the two, between innate potential and learned expertise.
Like a synthesis.
Exactly, a synthesis. Some people might genuinely start with a higher natural baseline for certain types of creative thinking, maybe because of their genes or their brain wiring or personality traits like being really open to new things. But crucially, that natural potential is rarely enough by itself. It needs nurturing. It needs deliberate practice, good education, a stimulating environment, and sustained effort to really develop and come to fruition.
It's like having the genes to be tall, but you still need good nutrition and health to actually reach that height.
That's a great analogy. And conversely, someone could dedicate years to intense training in a creative field, becoming incredibly skilled technically. But the research suggests that without at least some underlying aptitude, or maybe the right personality mix that encourages exploration and risk-taking, all that effort alone might not necessarily lead to those truly groundbreaking, original, big C creative achievements.
So for the really exceptional creative results, it seems like you often need both. Potential and the cultivation of skill.
That really seems to be the case. There's a model by Dean Keith Simonton called the Multiplier Effect that helps explain this synthesis. He basically argues that creativity comes from several factors interacting and amplifying each other. He highlights talent, effort, and opportunity.
How does that multiplier work in practice?
Well, imagine a child with, say, significant innate musical talent. That's factor one. Now, if that child gets top-notch music lessons, practices diligently for years, mastering difficult techniques, that's the effort and skill development, factor two. And then if they're also in a supportive environment, access to good instruments, chances to perform, mentors, a culture that values music, that's opportunity, factor three. Simonton's idea is that having all three factors doesn't just add up. It multiplies the chances of achieving really high levels of musical creativity. Someone with talent but no training, or great training but maybe limited innate feel for music, is much less likely to reach those same heights. Neither talent nor skill alone is usually enough. They often work together, reinforcing each other.
And how do personality traits and motivation fit into this interplay? We talked about openness possibly being innate, but does it also connect to skill development?
It really does bridge the gap. While traits like openness or being willing to take risks or handling ambiguity are linked to creativity and might have genetic roots, research also suggests they can be cultivated. Environments that actively encourage curiosity, that teach resilience when you fail, that promote a growth mindset. The belief that you can develop abilities through hard work, and these can actually strengthen those creativity-supporting personality traits. So even aspects of personality that seem innate can be shaped and developed by experience and how you learn to think about things. They have a skill-like dimension too.
What about intrinsic motivation? That internal drive, the passion for doing the thing itself.
Oh, that's absolutely vital for sticking with the hard work creativity often requires. And Behlad Csikszentmihalyi's research on flow states is super relevant here. Flow, that feeling of being completely absorbed in an activity, losing track of time, totally engaged.
Yeah, that effortless concentration feeling.
That's it. Creative people often describe being in flow when they're deep in their work. And a key finding from flow research is that you're most likely to get into that state when the challenge of what you're doing perfectly matches your level of skill. If it's too easy, you get bored. Too hard, you get anxious and frustrated. Flow happens in that sweet spot where your learned expertise is fully stretched by a task that's demanding but doable. It beautifully illustrates the interplay. Maybe an innate passion draws you in, talent motivation, but your ability to get into that deep, sustained creative flow depends heavily on having developed the necessary skills to meet the challenge.
It makes total sense that you need to really know your field to be truly creative within it.
Absolutely. Creativity rarely happens in a total vacuum. Major contributions almost always build on a deep understanding of the domain, the existing knowledge, the techniques, the history. A novelist needs mastery of language, story structure, maybe psychology. A scientist needs to know their field's principles inside out. Getting that deep knowledge is fundamentally about skill development learning, studying, practicing. Remember Wallace's stages. It starts with preparation, which is all about gathering that necessary knowledge before the breakthroughs can even happen.
And even the prodigies like Mozart still needed that foundation.
Absolutely. His incredible natural musicality was channeled, shaped, and amplified by rigorous training in theory, composition, performance, all learned skills. It just underscores that skill is necessary alongside talent, even for the most gifted. And the materials also really stress the role of failure and iteration in the creative process.
Like Thomas Edison's famous line about invention being 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration.
That quote captures it perfectly. Edison's development of a working light bulb wasn't one flash of genius. It involved systematically testing thousands of different materials for the filament, trial and error. Similarly, successful artists or writers usually produce countless sketches, drafts, experiments, many of which fail on the way to a final piece. That process of trying, failing, learning from the failure, and refining the idea isn't spontaneous magic. It's a disciplined, often painstaking, skill-based way of working. It shows that major creative outcomes often come from persistent effort and systematic exploration, not just a single bolt from the blue.
And finally, just circling back quickly to environment and opportunity again.
Yes, those external factors are critical enablers. Having access to resources, whether it's good schools, art materials, labs, technology, provides the foundation for developing skills. Having mentors can massively accelerate learning and guide creative growth. And the broader culture matters hugely. A kid with artistic talent needs access to supplies or classes. A society or a workplace that encourages experimentation, tolerates risk, and celebrates new ideas creates fertile ground where both innate potential and learned skills can actually blossom. Think about Silicon Valley's culture, historically embracing failure as a necessary part of innovation. That environment actively nurtured technological creativity.
Let's pull back again and look at the bigger picture across history and different cultures like the materials do. Seeing how views on creativity have changed really highlights the shifting balance between talent and skill, doesn't it?
It really does. In ancient Greece, like we mentioned, creativity was often seen as a gift from the muses external, almost supernatural. That view strongly aligns with creativity being an innate talent, something bestowed upon you.
But then the Renaissance came along, and that shifted things.
Big shift. It started viewing creativity as a human capacity. People like Leonardo da Vinci were admired not just for inspiration, but for their intellect, their powers of observation, their mastery of technique, their ability to work across disciplines. That era really started recognizing the crucial blend of innate genius and rigorous learned skill.
The Industrial Revolution seemed to swing the pendulum towards practical, skill-based invention.
Absolutely. The focus moved to inventors like James Watt improving the steam engine, or Thomas Edison churning out inventions from his lab through systematic experimentation. These were often seen as products of ingenuity, problem-solving skills, and applying learned technical knowledge to real-world challenges. Skill was front and center.
And how about the 20th and 21st centuries? Where are we now?
Well, today, largely thanks to psychology and neuroscience, the view is much more integrated. We study creativity as a cognitive process. There's a lot of effort going into understanding how we can teach it, measure it, foster it in schools and workplaces. The modern perspective strongly embraces this idea of a blend. It's part innate potential, part learned skill, and crucially heavily influenced by the environment.
And those cultural differences we talked about really reinforce that blended view.
They drive it home powerfully. As we discussed, Western cultures often put the spotlight on individual originality, the lone genius that leans towards talent. Many Eastern cultures might emphasize collective creativity, achieving harmony within established forms, or mastery through long, disciplined practice that highlights the skill aspect. Cross-cultural research consistently finds these differences. Collectivist societies often see creativity as emerging from the group, emphasizing collaboration skills. Individualistic societies tend to attribute it more to that unique spark within one person.
The materials also seem to want to debunk that myth of the lone genius a bit more directly.
Yes, that powerful image of someone like Isaac Newton under the apple tree or Steve Jobs having a sudden epiphany. It's a great story, but it often masks the reality. Many, maybe even most, major creative breakthroughs throughout history were actually collaborative. They built on the work of others, relied on extensive networks, shared knowledge.
The internet is a perfect example, not one inventor.
Not at all. It emerged from decades of work by countless researchers, engineers, institutions. The Renaissance wasn't just a few isolated geniuses, it was a whole ecosystem of artists, scientists, patrons, thinkers, all interacting, borrowing, building on each other's ideas. Recognizing this collaborative reality really challenges the pure innate talent narrative and underscores how important learned skills like communication, teamwork, and integrating existing knowledge are. Even in traditional societies, creativity was often channeled into communal forms, rituals, crafts requiring extensive training and adherence to shared norms, again emphasizing skill. And modern creativity, often focused on disruption in tech or art, requires both that innate drive and the learned skill of adapting quickly.
Let's get a bit deeper into the science again, beyond just the brain scans. The psychological models seem to try and map this out.
They do. Teresa Amabile developed a really influential componential model. She argues that for individual creativity to happen, you need three key things working together. First, domain-relevant skills. Basically, you need to know your stuff, have the expertise in your field. That's clearly learned. Second, creativity-relevant processes. These are your cognitive styles, like being able to think divergently, tolerate ambiguity, take risks. These might be partly innate, partly learned. And third, intrinsic task motivation, that passion, that inner drive to do the work for its own sake.
So even in that model, learned skill is right there at the foundation.
Absolutely fundamental. You need all three components. Another interesting framework is Robert Sternberg and Todd Lubert's investment theory. They compare creative people to smart investors. They buy low and sell high in the world of ideas. They identify and pursue ideas that are currently undervalued, maybe unpopular or risky, and then they invest the effort to develop them until their value becomes recognized.
That sounds like it requires a lot of judgment, strategy, and maybe just plain persistence.
It definitely highlights those aspects. Strategic thinking, being able to spot potential where others don't, and having the grit to push an unconventional idea forward. Those feel very much like skills you can cultivate. But the theory also acknowledges that the initial spotting of those undervalued ideas might involve some intuition, some willingness to go against the grain, which could link back to innate traits. So again, it points to a blend. And if we quickly revisit Wallace's 4 stages, preparation is all about skill acquisition. Verification at the end is about applying critical skills. Incubation and illumination in the middle might involve more unconscious, possibly innate processes, but the whole cycle relies on interacting between learned methods and potential intuitive leaps.
What about neuroplasticity? The idea that our brains can actually change based on what we do.
Neuroplasticity is huge here because it provides the biological mechanism for how creative skills can be developed through practice. Our brains are incredibly adaptable. When you really focus and practice something, especially something complex like a creative skill, your brain physically changes. It forms new connections between neurons, strengthens existing pathways. The materials mention studies on musicians, for example, showing real structural and functional changes in brain areas related to hearing, movement, even emotion, resulting from years of practice. It proves the brain's hardware isn't fixed, it's actively shaped by learning and experience.
So practicing creativity actually rewires your brain to be better at it.
That's the implication. You strengthen the networks that support that specific creative activity. And thinking about those brain networks, again, the default mode for generating ideas, the executive control for evaluating them, research by people like Roger Beatty, suggests that while individuals might differ in the baseline connectivity, the efficiency of switching and coordinating between these networks, which is crucial for effective creativity, can likely be improved through practice. Engaging in tasks that require both brainstorming and refining ideas probably strengthens that coordination. The neurological basis itself can be enhanced.
And bringing genetics back in one more time, those heritability estimates from Robert Plowman.
Right, those studies showed genetics plays a part, maybe 20–50%. But importantly, they also show that a huge chunk, often more than half, of the variation in creativity comes down to environmental factors. Identical twins who have the exact same genes can show different levels of creative achievement if they're raised in different environments. That's powerful evidence for the impact of experience. And then there's epigenetics, the idea that your environment, your experiences, even things like stress or diet, can actually influence how your genes are expressed. They can switch genes on or off, or dial their activity up or down. So even if you have a genetic predisposition towards certain traits linked to creativity, your life experiences play a massive role in whether and how that potential actually shows up.
So the genes might load the gun, but environment and experience pull the trigger, so to speak. Innate potential isn't destiny.
That's a good way to put it. It's a constant dynamic dance between nature and nurture. And just to bring Csikszentmihalyi's flow state back one last time, that feeling of peak creative immersion, while the enjoyment might be tied to intrinsic motivation or innate aptitude, the ability to actually get into and sustain that flow state is strongly linked to having developed enough skill to meet the challenge. It's just another perfect example of learned expertise and innate drive working together.
Okay, so if creativity is, at least significantly, a skill we can learn and develop, how can we practically go about fostering it? What do the sources suggest works?
The good news is the research points to a lot of practical strategies. In education, for example, there's a strong case for moving towards more progressive teaching methods. Things like inquiry-based learning, where students investigate their own questions, project-based learning, working on complex real-world challenges, and STEAM education, intentionally mixing arts with science, technology, engineering, and math.
Getting kids to think across those traditional subject boundaries.
Exactly. These approaches get students actively exploring, experimenting, thinking critically, making connections, all vital for creativity. Things like first robotics competitions, where kids design and build robots, are great examples of blending technical skills with creative problem solving. And studies, like those supported by the U.S. National Endowment for the Arts, show that kids involved in arts-integrated learning often score higher on creativity and critical thinking tests. It really shows creativity is teachable.
What about in the workplace? How can businesses encourage creativity as a skill?
Well, in today's economy, innovation is survival, right? So fostering creativity is crucial. The materials suggest creating the right environment is key. This might mean designing more flexible workspaces that encourage interaction, setting aside specific time for brainstorming, or allowing employees some freedom for personal projects like Google used to do with its 20% time.
Right, that led to things like Gmail, didn't it?
It did. It shows how giving people space and psychological safety to explore can unlock creativity across the board. Companies also invest in formal training, like workshops and design thinking, used by companies like Procter & Gamble to improve product development. It shows businesses treat creativity as a professional skill that can be systematically developed.
And this isn't just for young people or specific creative jobs, right? It's something you can work on throughout life.
Absolutely. Creativity isn't something that peaks and then declines necessarily. It's a lifelong capacity. Actively seeking out new experiences, travel, learning new things, reading outside your field, connecting different ideas can keep stimulating creative thinking at any age. There was a study from the University of Cambridge that found older adults who regularly engaged in creative activities like playing music or painting reported better well-being and cognitive flexibility. It really reinforces that creativity is a skill you can train and benefit from your whole life.
What about the role of technology? Is it helping or maybe hindering creativity?
Technology is a double-edged sword here. On the one hand, digital tools, graphic design software, music production apps, video editors have massively lowered the barrier to entry for many creative fields. They let people create and share really sophisticated work relatively easily. That's democratizing.
Yeah.
But there's a potential downside too. The pressure to create content that goes viral on social media, for example, can sometimes push people towards imitation or just optimizing for algorithms rather than pursuing truly original ideas. And relying too heavily on templates or AI tools might, some worry, stifle the development of personal skills and a unique voice. The trick seems to be using tech as a tool to augment human creativity, not replace the need for skill development and personal vision.
What are some of the main roadblocks? What holds creativity back, according to the sources?
Several big ones come up. Psychological barriers are really common things, like the fear of failure, being a perfectionist, just crippling self-doubt. These mindsets can totally freeze people up, stop them from taking the necessary risks.
If you're terrified of looking stupid, you're not going to try anything weird or new.
Exactly. And notice, these aren't necessarily about lacking talent or skill, they're about internal blocks stopping you from using them. The good news is, research suggests techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy, learning to reframe failure as learning, for example, can help overcome these. And even simple skill-based tricks like free writing to get past writer's block show how learned techniques can tackle these psychological hurdles.
And then there are the broader societal or environmental things.
Yes, external factors can be huge inhibitors. Lack of access to resources is a big one. Education, materials, technology. Rigid school systems focused only on standardized tests often punish divergent thinking instead of rewarding it. And cultural norms that discourage questioning, risk-taking, or rocking the boat can stifle innovation in schools and workplaces. Overcoming these often means actively building more supportive environments.
Socioeconomic factors must play a massive role in who gets access to those supportive environments.
Oh, absolutely. Socioeconomic status often directly impacts access to the very things that nurture creativity, quality early education, art or music lessons, technology, even just a home environment filled with books and stimulating conversation. A child with huge potential born into poverty might simply never get the opportunities to develop it that a wealthier child takes for granted. Trying to bridge those gaps through more equitable access to education and resources is vital if we want to foster creativity as a skill for everyone, not just the privileged few.
The link between stress and mental health also comes up as complex.
It is complex. A little bit of pressure, like a deadline, can sometimes actually spur creativity for some people, but chronic stress, high anxiety, or certain mental health conditions can really impair the cognitive flexibility needed for creative thinking. On the other hand, there's also research exploring links between certain conditions, like aspects of bipolar disorder, and periods of heightened creativity or divergent thinking in some individuals. It highlights this intricate mix of innate psychological factors, environmental stress, and the coping strategies people learn.
The materials also wade into some deeper, maybe more philosophical waters, especially with AI getting so good. Is creativity uniquely human?
That's becoming a really pressing question, isn't it? You look at AI systems like DALL-E generating images from text, or GPT models writing poems or code. The output often looks creative by our definition, novel and valuable. It forces us to ask, is the AI actually being creative in the human sense?
It can make new and seemingly useful or interesting things.
It can, astonishingly quickly. But the thinking often goes that human creativity usually involves more like deep emotions, conscious intention, personal history, cultural understanding, maybe even consciousness itself. Qualities AI doesn't seem to possess, or at least not in a way we understand. AI's creativity comes from incredibly complex algorithms learning patterns from massive data sets. It's learned computation. And that distinction is interesting because it challenges the idea that creativity is purely some mysterious innate talent exclusive to humans. It shows creative-like output can be generated through complex learning.
Another tricky area is the idea of artificially enhancing creativity.
Yeah, with advances in neuroscience, people are starting to talk about, even if it's still early days, potentially using things like brain stimulation, TMS, or cognitive enhancing drugs, nootropics, to boost creative abilities. If you could reliably enhance creativity technologically without all the hard work of practice, Well, that raises some big ethical questions.
It's like if you can just pop a pill or wear a device to be more creative, does that devalue the creativity that comes from struggle and effort?
Right. Questions about fairness, who gets these enhancements. Authenticity, is it really your creativity? And the risk of becoming dependent on external aids instead of developing internal skills. These possibilities just further blur that line between innate talent and cultivated skill.
Cultural appropriation also gets mentioned as an ethical consideration in creativity.
Yes, this is about taking creative elements, styles, symbols, stories from another culture, especially a marginalized one, without proper understanding, respect, or permission, and using them in your own work. The materials point out this can cause real harm and perpetuate inequalities.
So creativity isn't just about individual expression, it carries social responsibilities.
It seems so. Engaging creatively with other cultures requires sensitivity, learning, respect, often collaboration. It highlights that creativity isn't just a personal talent or skill, it's also about how we interact ethically with the world and each other.
It's really clear from the materials how this interplay of talent and skill shows up across so many different fields, not just art or science.
That's a really important takeaway. Take artistic creativity, someone like Frida Kahlo or Beethoven. We often see their unique vision, their emotional depth as talent, but translating that into those powerful paintings or symphonies that required incredible technical skill, mastery of composition, color, brushwork, harmony, instrumentation skills honed through years and years of practice. Kahlo's portraits blend that intense personal vision, maybe linked to innate sensitivity, with highly developed painting skill.
And scientific creativity, Einstein, Marie Curie, seems like a similar blend.
Definitely. Scientific breakthroughs often involve those intuitive leaps. Connecting ideas in new ways may be the talent part. Einstein's relativity started with a thought experiment, but turning that insight into a mathematically rigorous, testable theory, that required immense learned knowledge and analytical skill. Marie Curie's discovery of new elements needed brilliance, yes, but also incredibly painstaking, methodical lab work, experimental design skills, sheer persistence through failure. The skill side was crucial. Science needs both the spark and the rigorous learned methodology.
What about everyday creativity? The little C stuff.
That's maybe the clearest example of creativity as a skill everyone uses. Finding a clever way to fix something broken, improvising a meal from leftovers, figuring out a more efficient workflow. These are all creative acts. They involve taking knowledge and skills you already have and applying or adapting them in a new way. That ability to adapt and innovate in daily life is a skill sharpened by practice and experience. It shows creativity is universal, often expressed through learned capabilities.
Entrepreneurial creativity too, like with someone like Elon Musk. Vision plus practical skills.
Absolutely. Entrepreneurship often starts with a visionary idea. Spotting an opportunity others miss may be linked to innate traits like risk-taking or foresight, talent. But turning that vision into SpaceX or Tesla, that requires a massive toolkit of learned skills. Business strategy, engineering, finance, leadership, managing incredibly complex projects, learning from failures through iteration. The rocket vision needed the practical skill to actually build and launch them repeatedly.
It really seems like in every area, high-level creativity comes from combining natural ability with deep learned expertise.
That's the thread running through all the research. It's the synergy between them that unlocks the most significant creative achievements.
So looking ahead, how might creativity evolve? Especially with things like the digital age and AI really taking off.
Well, the digital age has already changed things dramatically. Tools and platforms make creation and sharing easier, more accessible. That's potentially great for fostering creativity more widely. But like we said, there's also that pressure for viral content, maybe leading to less originality. Balancing the tools with developing authentic personal skills and vision seems key moving forward.
And AI and automation, what's the impact they're likely to be?
AI can generate outputs that mimic creativity, but the sources suggest it still lacks that human depth, emotion, experience, cultural nuance. However, AI is becoming an incredibly powerful partner or tool for human creators. Think of an architect using AI to quickly generate dozens of initial concepts, which they then refine using their expertise and judgment. Or a musician using AI to explore harmonic possibilities.
So less human versus AI, more human plus AI.
That looks like a very probable direction. The future likely involves this kind of human-machine collaboration, blending our intuition and perspective with AI's processing power and pattern recognition. This will mean learning new skills, how to effectively prompt AI, how to critically evaluate its outputs, how to integrate it into our workflows. And finally, the materials really emphasize how crucial creativity fostered broadly will be for tackling the massive global challenges ahead. climate change, health crises, social inequality.
Problems that desperately need new thinking, new solutions.
Exactly. These aren't problems with easy, off-the-shelf answers. They demand creative, interdisciplinary approaches. Scientists, engineers, artists, policymakers, communities, all working together inventively. Fostering creativity as a skill across all populations, making it more accessible, seems fundamental if we're going to find effective ways forward on these complex global issues.
Okay, so to wrap up this deep dive, the big takeaway is that asking, is creativity talent or skill, is kind of the wrong question. It's not really in either situation.
That's definitely the clearest message from everything we've looked at. Creativity seems to be this complex, dynamic thing, a powerful interplay between our innate potential, our genes, brain wiring, personality maybe, and the skills we learn through practice, education, experience, and staying motivated.
It sounds like that natural potential, if you have it, needs nurturing. It needs skill development to really blossom, like a seed needs the right conditions. And just working hard, while essential, might not get you to genius-level creativity without some underlying aptitude.
That seems to capture the balance well. And recognizing this dual nature, this interplay, has really big implications. For education, it means we shouldn't just focus on finding the gifted kids. We should aim to nurture creative thinking skills in everyone, give them the tools and environment to explore their potential. For workplaces, it suggests building a culture that supports risk-taking, collaboration, and provides training in creative methods can boost innovation across the whole organization, not just relying on a few creatives.
And for you listening personally, it's maybe empowering. It suggests that wherever you feel you're starting from, you can actively work to enhance your own creativity throughout life by learning, trying new things, practicing, being willing to experiment, and maybe even fail sometimes.
Absolutely. Understanding this blend, part nature, part nurture, gives us a much richer, more useful way to think about creativity. We can better understand how to foster it in ourselves and others, how to harness it, not just for personal growth, but maybe to make a positive difference in the world too.
Maybe the real power here isn't just putting creativity in a box, but realizing it's not some fixed thing you either have or you don't. It's more like an ongoing journey. Yeah. A journey of a discovery, constantly blending who you are innately with everything you learn and experience.
A journey that's really open to everyone, if they choose to take it.
Well, we really hope this deep dive has given you a clearer picture, maybe sparked some new thoughts about creativity in your own life, your work, or just how you view innovation and potential. Thanks so much for joining us for this exploration.
Yeah, it's been a really rich topic to unpack. Definitely lots to think about.
Before we wrap up, if you found this exploration valuable, please do take a moment to like this video, share it with others who might be interested, and subscribe to the Learn English Lab YouTube channel. We appreciate your support and hope to see you on the next deep dive.